Evan, typically when a major story develops, and this was your major story, there is typically a rush to publish a book. Why is 3 years after the fact the right time for a book like this to come out?
I wanted the book to come out sooner, but this isn't your typical sports book that you can kind of turn around in one off season. It's really sports investigative work. And, I think at the end of the day, it actually comes out at an interesting time, right? The Astros are reigning champs again. You had James Click let go 6 days after winning that World Series. The earliest it probably could have come out would have been late last season. I think it would have gotten lost in the mix a little bit. So the short answer, it took a lot of time to report on this much stuff. It goes back to Jeff Luhnow's Cardinals days. It's a decade of Astros baseball. There's other teams involved. It wasn't a small, easy project.
The amount of work, Evan, that went into this, first of all, it's excellent. It's an excellent read, and congratulations on that. Getting this amount of information out of Major League Baseball clubs and the people involved in them is very, very tough. The access you were provided is unique. How did you feel about the work product when it all came together and the process and getting that done?
Look, I'm proud of it. It did take a lot of, again, time to get to a point where you could kind of paint this whole picture. And you're right. I do think it's uncommon for people the phrase I keep using is get under the hood. This is really explaining what was actually going on inside Houston's front office and also at the commissioner's office in this period in baseball. I think there's a reflex for people, sports writers and fans too. The team wins, team's doing good on the field, doing well on the field. And, they just automatically write, well, they're winning, so they must be great. And this book, I think in totality, poses a pretty interesting question. Well, what if the results on the field are very different than a lot of what else is going on with the team? What if there's a continuation of the conversation beyond they're good on the field? And, the 2017 Astros are really the example of that. Yes, they held up a trophy at the end, but the conversation for a lot of people, maybe some, but a lot of people, doesn't end there. And, that's what I want people to think about as they're reading it. Do you care about the means to the end? And to grapple a little bit with, this is actually what happens. If you're curious what the reality is under the surface and not just the glowing, typical baseball is so wonderful narratives that exist, here it is.
So, Evan, what picture did you paint? What did you find under that hood that shocked you, amazed you, and kind of left you like, wow, oh my gosh, what is this? This actually happened.
Yeah, the Astros were really smart. There's no question about that. And when you actually get down into the granular level of how they were innovating and what they were doing, there's a lot of impressive stuff. I mean, there's no question that the Astros under Jeff Luhnow did a very good job evaluating baseball players and building rosters and developing baseball players. That core ability, I don't think anybody could or should doubt. Sure, they made a couple mistakes, but fewer than most other organizations. I think what really jumped out to me as I did the reporting for the book is how different the perception of the organization, the front office was compared to what was actually happening. Everybody thought that I think everything was genius and hunky-dory. And then you get inside, let's just take 2017, for example. Not only do you have the cheating scheme, you have the presence on the ground of McKinsey & Company, the management consulting firm, meeting with, not the business side, the baseball operations group. These are outside management consultants visiting with AJ Hinch, including some players and coaches as well, and evaluating his in-game moves. And there's a quote in the book where an executive says, I think the McKinsey report is what ended up leading to the destruction of the Astros front office. And so you step back from 17, not only is the team great on the field, not only is the team cheating, but you also have this really fractious event going on inside the front office with the top leaders fighting with each other, a lot of conflict. I think it's wilder than people would imagine a baseball team's front office to be.
I always felt ego got in the way of the Astros. AJ Hinch during the ALCS in 2019, when there's allegations of sign stealing, AJ Hinch says, if you're going to accuse my guys, put your name on it. put your name on it. And ultimately someone did put their name on it, obviously being Mike Fiers. Did you get a lot of disgust from other organizations or people that you spoke to during your research that maybe how the Astros carried themselves during all this was part of the downfall, while why some were eager to talk to you about it?
Yeah, I was in the back row when Hinch had that quote, and I had already, that was October of 2019, and I had been working on the piece for a year at that point. So it was rather shocking to me as well that he would go to that length to say that. Yeah, even if you go back to 2014, and the book goes through this whole period, you know, there was the very famous Sports Illustrated cover where Jeff Luhnow grants a very high level of access to a Sports Illustrated reporter. He writes this glowing piece, and it does end up cool that the cover predicts that they'll win the 2017 World Series, and then lo and behold, they do. But even if you go back to that time, as much as Astros fans loved that, people inside the organization and then outside the organization, inside of baseball, did not look very well on it, because it was the Astros management, after they're at that point coming off 3 100 lost seasons consecutively, touting how smart they are before they, in the eyes of many, had won anything. And there was also this conflict of, on the one hand, you don't want to talk about anything because it's all proprietary and secret. On the other hand, you're out there touting, look how smart we are. So yes, for the Astros were among the most innovative teams, but they were also among the loudest. And, you know, that can be hard to separate sometimes. Is the loudest team necessarily the smartest or the wisest? But the ego that you speak of, I think the attention that Jeff Luhnow wanted to bring on himself, the narratives he wanted to create around himself. Yeah, I think that all plays in.
And Jeremy, you're one of the few analysts locally who was willing to criticize the Astros culture. So when you're reading this book, how did it make you feel based on all of what you've said and how some Astros fans had reacted to you?
Well, you know, it's funny. I was going in about the drafts, and I was thinking about, I remember a passage in Evan's book that said Jeff Luhnow had a problem. I'm paraphrasing, had a problem. He had been, diminishing and marginalizing the work of what he inherited, but now was winning games on inherited players. And in the industry, I can tell you that was a significant problem. You know, when I was still in the scouting world, the culture, watching the culture on the other side, knowing what was going under the hood, still having that, that code of silence, if you will, right? Because what happens on that side stays there. But knowing that there were other good people that Luhnow walked in on and just axed because there was no reason to do it. It was very refreshing to see that kind of come out in print to a gigantic worldwide audience and have that back up what the industry had been saying. My question in that, Evan, when I was reading it was, and even now we're talking about ego. We're talking about how that adds on to that. That's all Jeff Luhnow's ego. When you go all the way back to the Cardinals, seems to be a pattern of ego with him, where he was taking information, using it as his own. How much did you find that the more that ego stacked up, the more destruction was certain at the end of the line?
Yeah, you know, I would love it for somebody to read the book once, but if somebody reads the book once and then goes back through the second chapter of the book, which is all about Luhnow's time with the Cardinals, I think it's pretty clear upon a reread that everything that happens in Houston is very similar to what happens in St. Louis. That St. Louis is a foreshadowing. One of the things that I do think comes into play is Luhnow faced a lot of pushback in St. Louis, and that wasn't all his fault. He was brought in, dropped in on an existing general manager, and there wasn't a lot of consideration for, okay, if we're going to make change at the ownership level, Bill DeWitt, the owner of the Cardinals, if we're going to make change, what's the best way to do it? What's the real way to enact change management? And it was very contentious. It's not surprising it was contentious. But then when Luhnow gets to Houston, well, now he's got control. He had control of some areas of baseball operations in St. Louis, but not the whole thing. And so at that point, he's already decided, I'm going to do it my way. He tells a friend, I know that whenever it ends here in Houston, it probably won't end well. There's not going to be some cushy special assistant job waiting for me somewhere else. And so knowing that, I'm going to do it my way. And he certainly set out to do that. But over time, more and more problems end up growing. And to your earlier point, you're right. he didn't acquire Jose Altuve. He didn't acquire George Springer. He didn't acquire Dallas Keuchel. He didn't trade them either. That's important. He certainly Keuchel blooms under Luno. But this question of credit gets pretty messy. And I was writing about that even back in 2014 when the Astros started to play well. Luno described the farm system as equivalent to an expansion team, which is, I think, unduly insulting to the people he took over for. Did it lack some depth? Maybe, but it was not a farm system that has George Springer, Dallas Keuchel, and Jose Altuve, plus already Jason Castro in place. I don't know if that's an expansion team.
When you step outside the Houston bubble, we know this city is all about this team. I mean, it's unprecedented, really, what this team has really done, not just in baseball, but in sports in general. But what is the legacy here? When you take a step back after you wrote it, you take all information in, think about it. What's the legacy of this Astros run, this organization throughout this time?
I'm not somebody who believes in telling other people how to think. And I myself, I grew up a huge fan. I was a Mets fan. There's no reason I can't tell you that. And really, that was my entree to baseball writing and journalism. So I remember the feeling of fandom, and I know how much people love their team. And you live with them and ride with them through the highs and lows. And I fully expect and almost hope Astros fans always do that. I think it's kind of hard to walk away from the book without a feeling of being a little bit unsettled. There's no question the Astros have been very good on the field, but what it took to get there, I think, should have people asking some questions. Does it matter to you how you get somewhere? Does the means to the end matter, or is it simply the end? And we live in a very bottom line driven world, not just in baseball, society in general. But I think this exposes what really goes on. And I think some of it's going to be uncomfortable for people, but there is positive stuff too. It's a shades of gray situation. It is not that the Houston Astros were entirely evil. It's not that they're entirely great either.
Is there a part of this book you thought would get more attention than it has? Because a lot of excerpts are out there detailing a lot of different organizations.
It was a little hard to tell. I mean, I had a sense of what might draw some attention, and people obviously devour the cheating scandal stuff. But this, for anybody who's picked it up, the book gets to the cheating. It explains the cheating. It reveals new stuff about the cheating. It is really a management culture book, though. It is not, 300 plus pages of people banging on a garbage can. It's much more than that. It's the context, the explanation of how did we get here? How did we get to a point where 4 people get fired, Hinch, Cora, Beltran, Luno, on, and the Taubman incident as well. Because it spans so much time, there are a lot of little details that I came across, and, I went, whoa, this is wild. And you don't know exactly what's going to resonate with people. For example, smaller thing. The Astros at one point buy an X-ray machine to take scans of players in the Dominican Republic's hands, and on the feeling that they could determine how big their hands would grow based on these X-rays. And there's an Astros employee on the record in the book talking about, could this money have been used elsewhere? There's something kind of skeevy about that, for lack of a better word, of buying an X-ray machine to measure the hand size of young Latin players. And there's a huge amount of little details like that. The creation of a company called Modient, which ends up taking money from the Astros. They give all the R&D, the research and development work, to Modient. And it's Jim Crane's only, it's a Jim Crane sole owned company, as opposed to the Astros, which are owned by a bunch of different owners. There's a part in the book where Jim Crane, according to an Astros employee, says, we can't fire black people because Crane had a very messy and ugly discrimination suit brought against his outside business. So really, at every turn in the book, there's so much stuff that it can be hard for me to pick out one or know exactly what's going to prompt reactions. But yeah, there are a few things that I look at and go, I wonder if people notice that.
Obviously on the field, they've been successful. The players have played the game. Aside the cheating scandal aside, yes, the banging the trash can, that's fine. But these are good players. I mean, these guys can play ball. In a way, as you write this book, I don't know if it's a fair question, but do you feel bad for some of the guys that are playing the game that had no control of what was happening off the field in the front office?
Yes and no. The cheating scandal, look, cheating was a team-wide effort. Now the pitchers they don't hit. So you can argue, well, they shouldn't be included in it. And yet they're still a part of that clubhouse. And in general, with a team-wide cheating scheme, it's a messy thing to break down. It's almost simpler. It is simpler when you have PEDs or steroids, because, okay, one person did it, shame on that person. But how do you assign culpability when it's team-wide? Do you assign more blame to those who start the scheme, those who use the scheme more, those who might not use the scheme as much, don't stop it, those who maybe didn't like the scheme but liked the results and didn't feel like speaking out? It's a really tricky thing, and would have been very interesting if MLB had actually punished Astros players to see how what the punishments were, right? How do they assign that blame? Is it equivalent across the roster, or is it different based on the role a player plays? In general, I'm aware of the weightiness of the reporting. People did lose their jobs. It's not something I take lightly. But at the end of the day, what I did, Ken Rosenthal did, he was my reporting partner on the original story at The Athletic. We revealed what was going on. We reported fairly and accurately about what was going on with the team. And, AJ Hinch had a quote in 2020. I think he was talking MLB Network. But he was asked about how will people remember this team? And, he says it's a fair question, but we did it to ourselves. And I really think that's true, right? The Astros players, at the end of the day, if they're unhappy about how people look at them after the fact, well, how do you bat back against that point? They did do it to themselves. They put themselves in this position where people could question them. And I think people ask me a lot about Jose Altuve. I don't think anybody looks at Jose Altuve and goes, that guy's a bad baseball player. People understand that these are very, very good baseball players. It's not that it's a straw man argument, but no one's sitting there going, Altuve, Springer, Correa, that these guys couldn't play baseball. So at the end of the day, I think they got to ask themselves, why are we here? You did it to yourself.
Along those lines, you talked about it being a management culture book, right? We talked about how that is a theme, even with Jim Crane and his businesses like Modient, and with Jeff Luhnow and his background, right? Going back to the tech companies and marketing, and how he was tying things together along the line, getting into the Astros. With that management, it was very clear that while player discipline will always be something that's debated, it was very clear that the memo came from Major League Baseball to Jeff Luhnow and stopped, right? And never made it down to that. Now, I'm a big believer that it's not illegal until it is. And I think we can all say that with certainty that some level of cheating was across the league in different ways, right? How much did you find in your research with Major League Baseball that the player culpability was tied to, or lack of, tied to the fact that they never knew definitively from the general manager? And how much do you think that's going to help them along the line? What is it, a black mark forever, or is it something they can ultimately get past?
Yeah, so this is a relatively complicated topic. It is certainly a bad thing that Jeff Luhnow did not pass on that memo. And as a matter of labor relations, the technical governance of employees, when you have a management group and a union, so there's a collective bargaining agreement in place, right? The players have a union. If management doesn't give sufficient notice of how something is going to be punished, or that something is specifically punishable, a union in any setting is going to file a grievance, most likely, and that grievance will probably lead to the punishment getting reduced or entirely overturned. And so that is an explanation as to why really Manfred didn't try to punish, because A, Luhnow hadn't, B, Manfred had also given notice to all the teams multiple times that if this behavior happens, He's holding the manager and the GM accountable. In fact, in 2019, he even specifically says, not the players, in this memo that goes out to the team. And so Manfred's in a losing position at that point. Now, if you step back for a second and ask, well, did the players really not know what they were doing was wrong? I got a bridge to sell you. You know, they took down the monitor after games. When Danny Farquhar notices in September that there's banging noises, the Astros rush to remove the monitor. You don't do that if you think what you're doing is on the level. You don't keep it hidden the way they tried to keep it hidden. You don't deny it the way Carlos Beltran denied it after our initial report came out, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So from a labor law perspective, the lack of notice is bad and certainly would help the players if Manfred tried to punish. From a, did the Astros players really know they were cheating? What do you think?
I just got to ask you, this is such a high profile story, high profile investigation. How has this changed your life?
As my phone drops, I don't know if that's what does that tell you? You know, I mean, look, it took a lot of time and work to do this book, and it took over my life. And it's really a book of 10 years of reporting. It goes back to when I got to Houston for the Houston Chronicle in 2013. So it's been omnipresent in my life. You know, it was hard for me to pull away. You know, going out to the dinner, you're always thinking about the next thing you need to do for the book. And some people are better at that type of process than I am. It was very hard for me to separate, but I still have a day job. You know, if the question is, did this give you money, fortune, and fame? You know, I still walk down the street and people, you know, I'm not getting recognized and asked for autographs or anything. And it's not like this has been a windfall for me financially. So I think there's a sense of professional accomplishment that comes with breaking a major story. Again, you know, it's weighty. So it's not like you're throwing a parade for yourself. But yeah, I assume that if you know, if I pass away tomorrow, there'd be a 2-line obituary that said he and Ken Rosenthal broke the Astros story. I think the story, clearly by the fact that we're still talking about it, even outside of a book coming out, 4 years after the story came out, 6 years after the cheating, it lingers. It's a major story. You know, I'm not going to forget it anytime soon. I don't know about anybody else, but that's probably the best answer I can give you.
He is Evan Drellich, and the book is Winning Fixes Everything. Evan, thanks so much for joining us tonight on Sports Extra.
Thanks, guys.